I was definitely a rebellious kid in middle school and high school. In fact, I actually went to a Christian school that basically thought rock music was the devil for a little while. And so I had to kind of clandestinely listen to a lot of classic rock, CCR, Led Zeppelin, things like that for a little while. And then when I got into like high school, I started getting into hair bands in the '80s and things like that. And until about 1984, about the time that Born in the USA came out, I still listened to them quite a bit, but then Born in the USA came out, and that kind of started my Bruce Springsteen um, obsession, and really just got me interested in the catalog that preceded all of that, and learning the story of his long hiatus and things like that. It really became interesting to me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me on today's episode is a fellow podcaster and a big Bruce Springsteen fan, Mike Throne. Mike, welcome to the show.
Jesse, thanks for having me on. It's been interesting to kind of be a part of this process. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Tell us a little about yourself.
All right. Well, my name is Mike Throne. I'm actually the president and CEO of the Chillicothe Ross Chamber of Commerce in Chillicothe, Ohio. We're about an hour south of Columbus, just down Route 23. And I'm actually was born in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm 53. But I moved when I was really, really young, probably within my first 3 or 4 years, to Sandusky, Ohio, which was up on the lake. It's where Cedar Point is, if people know where that's at. And then moved down here about 24 years ago, and kind of found a new hometown. So it's been kind of fun to be part of Chillicothe and what we're doing here.
Good. Well, very nice. And that's what your podcast is about, right? Is the city?
Yeah. So so I started out as a journalist. I moved to Chillicothe in 1997, and journalists are kind of transient. We kind of go where either the money or the title goes.
Okay.
So
yes.
I thought I'd probably be here 3 or 4 years or so, and then move on to my next thing. Well, the town kind of got a hold of me. I ended up getting married and having kids, and next thing you know, you're here for 24 years. And I left journalism about 3 years ago to join the chamber, and I've just really enjoyed it. I love the town. We've gone through a massive resurgence of our downtown in the last 10 years, and so it's been really great to watch all of that. And we kind of figure, if we're going to make it something great, we might as well keep investing in the community. So that's kind of what we're doing.
Oh, kind of nice. That's cool.
Yeah, and I didn't mention the name of the podcast. The name of the podcast is called Feels Like Home.
Yes.
I'm a co-host of that with my friend Marty Ford. And yeah, we kind of focus on the interesting people and the things that are going on in and around Chillicothe.
That sounds great. That sounds a lot of fun. My wife and I got married in '84, and in '86, we were looking to make a change. And, we moved to Dallas, and, in her mind, and I had not even thought that far, well, we'll be here for a few years, and then, we'll end up moving somewhere else. And that was '86, and we're now here, and Dallas has become home, or the Metroplex area. So yeah, I understand about that. You mentioned growing up in Hartford. Talk about growing up, and what kind of music was your house listening to, your parents?
Yeah, so my mom and dad were actually old country standards. They really enjoyed country music quite a bit. My dad was very big into Willie Nelson and Chris Christopherson, and he played around on the guitar quite a bit. And so I grew up listening to Chris Christopherson albums and Willie Nelson albums, and my dad really, and my mom really liked Charlie Pride a lot too, and so that's kind of what I grew up on. There was some influence of some soul in there, some Al Green, some Sam Cooke. I remember very vividly the first time I ever heard "A Change Is Gonna Come." I was sitting, listen. I was probably 4 or 5 years old, maybe, and I was listening to it on a record player as my mom played it next to me, and I remember even at a young age just thinking that it was really great music. And so I grew up with kind of an eclectic mix of different, um, different musics around me a lot. I had didn't we lived out in the country, so I didn't have a lot of friends that lived around me. So I would go to somebody's house and they would maybe be listening to 70s rock or something like that. And so I got influenced by that a little bit too. So it was kind of an interesting mix of different music that I kind of grew up on.
Well, this joke I make, Mike, is that I'm a little bit younger than you. I was born in '59. My dad was originally from Tennessee, but then moved to Hawaii, Ohio. And then my mom grew up in Louisiana, and that's where they met when he was stationed at Fort Polk. And, and growing up in our house, we listened to both kinds of music, country and Western, to use the joke from the Blues Brothers, because the same thing, Charlie Pride, Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash, a big player in our house. In fact, there are times, not so much now, but early in our relationship, my wife would go, there'd be a song on, and she'd like, how the hell do you know that song? I'm like, well, because my parents played it. So yeah, that's funny. In fact, I've said this story multiple times. My cousins in Ohio couldn't believe when I was like 9 or 10, I couldn't name all 4 Beatles. I was like, I don't know. I mean, I could probably name you who's on the Tennessee 3, but, but yeah, exactly.
I
So
neglected to mention Johnny Cash. That was on a pretty repetitive basis in my house too. My dad had all the LPs of Johnny Cash. So
yeah,
at one point in time, I probably could have quoted for you every Chris Christopherson album and when you've had to flip it over,
yes,
and what songs were on the A side and the B side. But my
yeah.
memory doesn't serve me well enough to do that anymore.
Well, yeah, and I think about that, and I also just think of the great, Sunday Morning Coming Down, and how Chris Christopherson wrote that, and then Johnny Cash did it, and it kind of became Johnny's song. But the idea of what Chris Christopherson has written and done is pretty impressive. Yeah. So you're getting in high school and you're visiting friends. What did you rebel from country music from your parents, or did you just expand your listening? Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, so I was definitely a rebellious kid in middle school and high school. In fact, I actually went to a Christian school that basically thought rock music was the devil for a little while. And so I had to kind of clandestinely listen to a lot of classic rock, CCR, Led Zeppelin, things like that for a little while. And then when I got into like high school, I started getting into hair bands in the 80s and things like that. And until about 1984, about the time that Born in the USA came out. I still listen to them quite a bit, but then Born in the USA came out, and that kind of started my Bruce Springsteen obsession, and really just got me interested in the catalog that preceded all of that, and learning the story of his long hiatus and things like that. It really became interesting to me.
Yeah. So, there are the Gateway album, to use Gateway Drugs, was Born in the USA for a lot of people. Can you articulate what about his music spoke to you?
Yeah. So 1984, I think I was 15, 16 years old. I had a friend named Charlie Damron, and Charlie had a massive boom box that he would bring to everything we would do. If we played a pickup football game, he would bring, the boombox and we'd listen to music. If we played baseball or basketball or we're just hanging around at somebody's house, he'd bring the boombox. And I remember it very vividly. We were playing wiffle ball in my buddy's backyard, and he brought his boombox over and popped in "Born in the USA," and I just heard those pounding drums of the intro of "Born in the USA," and I thought, wow, this is different. And then we listened to the whole A side, and I think after the whole A side of the cassette, I was hooked. I wanted to learn more. I actually ended up borrowing it from him that day and listening to it 2 or 3 times through. Went and got my own copy, and I think for me, I was blown away by the lyrics and just how full the sound was. To me, it was like, I had liked bands like the Stones. I had liked, Led Zeppelin, but it felt like this was a band that had a fuller sound and like everybody worked together in the
Right.
band, from the sax to the drums to the piano, and then of course guitar. Like everybody was just so in sync. And to look back on it and to hear even back a couple of years after I started liking the album, that a lot of it was done in one take. It's
Yeah.
just amazing to me. And so to me, it just was I would sit down and take the liner notes out of that little cassette case and flip through them and just sit there and read the lyrics over and over again. It just became, I've always really liked music that had great lyrics, that had meaning and depth to them. And so I think that's really what kind of started me down the path. When I went back and listened to The River and, my favorite album, which is Darkness on the Edge of Town, and reading those lyrics and hearing this dark, music in a lot of those albums just really spoke to me.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like you did a lot of, after Born in the USA, went and explored back catalogs.
Yeah, I didn't get into the first 2 albums very much, Greetings and then Wild, Innocent, and East Street Shuffle. I really, for whatever reason, I didn't gravitate toward those, but I did gravitate toward Born to Run, of course, The River, and then I kind of picked up Darkness a little bit later. But I remember the first time I ever heard Darkness, I just was blown away. To me, it almost didn't sound like the same guy that did Born in the USA. But once you kind of get into the catalog, you kind of see how artists change, bands change, things like that. I really, really enjoyed, just kind of discovering this guy for the first time. I had heard Hungry Heart on the radio. I had heard Born in the USA before the album came out. It was being played a lot. But for some reason, boy, it was just a completely different feel once I started digging into those back catalogs. I had heard Born to Run, but it never really equated to me with learning the whole catalog. And that's when, the more I listened, the more I was in deep. And, back then you could get singles that were, the small records. And on the flip side, there was usually a song that was not on the album. And so
Yeah.
I would try to buy all of those as well, so I could hear these songs that, only a few people were going to get to hear.
So, Mike, I always like to preface this question with, a caveat that the amount of times you've seen Bruce perform live is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. There are people that have been on this podcast that have never seen him. I had a couple people that got to see him this past summer on Broadway, and that was their first show ever because they're such young fans. And then there's people that found him early in the 70s and live in Jersey or New York or Philly and have seen him a couple hundred times. So for the record, do you count how many times you've seen him? And if you are, how many?
I do. So the next time that I see Bruce, and there will be a next time.
Good.
It will be number 15.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah, I am convinced. I think he is itching to perform. I think he is itching to have another tour. I don't think this will be the last tour they do. Things may change. I think they have gotten a second wind, so to speak, after this pandemic. I think they, it was interesting. They were interviewing Jason Isbell, and he said that financially, him and his wife Amanda were doing fine, but not having that ability to perform for someone was really starting to wear him thin. So I can imagine. What was your first show?
So my first show was July 8th, 1985. It was the Municipal Stadium stop in Cleveland, Ohio of the Born in the USA tour. I actually I was a rising senior, I guess is what they call it now. It was right before my senior year of high school. Born in the USA had come out earlier, come out a year earlier. And I didn't, I'd gone to see a bunch of concerts in that time frame because, as a young kid, I really liked enjoying live music. But I basically put every other show that I was possibly going to go on, knowing that maybe the stadium tour was going to be a little pricey, and literally sat probably in what would probably be called the worst seat in the worst stadium for a stadium tour in the whole world. If you knew anything about the old Municipal Stadium, it was a cavernous stadium that seated about 90,000. And, a lot of places say that there's no bad seats in the house. There were a lot of bad seats in that house, and I think I found one of them. I think I was behind I remember very vividly being behind a big girder that if I craned around enough, I could probably see down just to see the dots on the stage. But just being in the room and being
funny.
in the place
was
enough for me. So
yeah. So do you have other stories from live shows that you'd want to share?
Yeah, I tell you, one of my favorite things is I love taking people to see Bruce for their first time.
Yes.
Taking my wife to see Bruce for the first time. I've seen many of my best friends have gone with me. For a while there, I would talk about it so much at work when I was working at the newspaper here in town that people were like, you know what, if you ever go, let me know and I'll go with you. So I remember the first time I took two people with me, we drove all the way to Cleveland and back in the same night, which is about 3 hours from here, about 3 hours and 20 minutes or so. The last time that I went, there was two other coworkers with me, my best friend and my wife. And then my pastor of my church, he pastors a Wesleyan church here in town. He texts me every once in a while about with questions about Bruce albums and songs and so on. And I was talking about the new album with him, and he hadn't heard it yet. And he said, I'm serious about this. If Bruce tours again, you got to make sure you remember me so we can go. And I said, well, that is a promise that I will keep for sure. So that's one of my favorite things. I think the two shows that I think really stand out to me that I've seen. I went to the first of the two Tom Joad shows in Cleveland, which were at the music hall there. Mm-hmm. And just having him stripped down in that environment, it was the first of two nights. And of course, Youngstown was a song that was big on that album. And of course, being very close to there, it was a really big deal to be there in that theater. It was actually a coworker of mine went with me to that show, who I've ended up going to 3 shows with now total. And so that was a really big one that I really, really enjoyed. And then the other one, I went to see Bruce on the Wrecking Ball tour at Quicken Loans Arena. I think it was in April of 17, maybe. That would have been 12. So, and I went with my friend Charlie, who I told you got me into him, and his sister. She had some friends of hers from their group in high school, which was a couple years ahead of me. And his sister, her name is Shannon. She's the biggest Bruce fan I know, bar none. And she lost her son to a tragic accident the year before.
Oh, wow.
And was still feeling a lot of those effects. And it's the only time I've ever been in the pit at a Bruce show. And just being around her and her group of friends that were also in that pit, it was just, it was also the shows after Clarence and Danny had passed. And so, I just felt like, in that moment, it was just a perfect environment, and just enjoying that night with my friends was really cool. That was also in Cleveland, so I had to drive 3 hours to that show too. But I can tell you, I wasn't tired when I came home. I was still flying high, you know.
Yeah, and I believe um, I'm double checking, but
I think that would have been 16 when I saw it.
yeah,
I'm trying to think
Quicken
when that
Loans in
show
the
would have been.
12th, April 17th, 2012. And the reason
Yeah.
why is, he was doing the Wrecking Ball and he wasn't coming anywhere close to Dallas. And so my wife and I have been wanting to take a vacation together. We had not done one, we either with another couple or with the kid, and we were just wanting to do something solo. And we were debating on like renting a cabin somewhere. And so I called her and I said, I've got a plan. She's like, okay, what's the plan? I said, Bruce Springsteen is playing in Cleveland in April. I said, so we can leave here, stop in Kentucky. And my father had died in 2011, and he's buried at the Veteran Cemetery right outside of Fort Knox, Kentucky. I said, so we can go see his stone. We had not seen his stone yet. I said, we'll do a couple of stages of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, because when we had gone and buried my father, she had picked up that brochure and said, oh, this looks like it would be fun sometime. I said, we'll see Charles in Columbus. We'll see Tom in Cleveland. We'll see Bruce in Cleveland. We'll go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We'll come back. We'll finish the Kentucky Bourbon Trail and then come home. She's like, okay, sounds perfect. And so that's what we did. So it was, we had, we ended up eating at Melt there in Cleveland, which is the gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches, and had a great time. And that was a fun show. It was a really good show, and he talked a little bit about Light of Day, right? And how the connection to Cleveland. So yeah, a really, really great show. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many newbies have you brought over the years, Mike?
Boy, I'm trying to think. I've probably taken a dozen or so for their first Bruce Springsteen show. You know, God willing, and he's still playing, and I'll take my kids.
Yeah.
I've got 5 kids,
Yeah.
ranging in age from 21 to 5, and I'd like to take all of them for their first show. And
Yeah.
the thing about it is, every time I think Bruce is probably not going to go on the road anymore, he's in his 70s, and I mean, every time I think he's not going to do it, he starts telling people that, especially during this pandemic, I can't wait to get back out on the road again, and we will see you soon. And I start getting jazzed,
Sure. So talk to me. What's your thoughts on Western Stars and Letter to You?
So I am a big fan of Western Stars. It is kind of harkening back to my Chris Christopherson, Willie Nelson days. When the film came out and he covers Rhinestone Cowboy at the end, I remember my dad walking around singing Rhinestone Cowboy from the time it came out. He passed last December. I mean, I remember him well into his late 70s walking around his house singing that song. So, I'll always have an affinity for Western Stars that maybe other people can't appreciate. But and then I tell you what I love about Letter to You. I feel like it's such an inherently personal album for Bruce.
Yes.
That it just shines through. And having watched both of those albums, there's obviously Apple TV films related to them, and watching that, it just speaks to how much Bruce looks at music as a personal journey.
Yes.
And I can just really understand that and relate to that. And I think that that's what I really enjoy about those two albums. When Letter to You came out, I thought, well, this is a pretty good song. I wonder what the rest of the album will be like. And there are albums, when I first listened to it all the way through, I thought, there's a couple things on there. Maybe I'm not feeling those songs. But the more that I listened to it, the more I really enjoyed it. you know, I really think that, if you're a true Bruce fan, maybe you're a mark and you can't say no to anything he ever does. But I feel like there's a lot of people out there who are kind of like me, that you'll admit when you don't like something, but you'll be really honest about when you really feel like he's really hit a home run. I think when The Rising came out, everybody recognized that as a masterpiece, and it may take a few years for people to understand the greatness of doing Western Stars. When you're known for doing rock exclusively, and maybe Letter to You is going to feel the same way.
Yeah, Mike, I did not mention, as you forgot to mention Johnny Cash, I did not mention how much my mom loved Glenn Campbell, right? So I'm like you, that Western Stars, had that Jimmy Webb, Glenn Campbell feel. And so I loved the album to begin with. And then when I saw the film, it cemented it, because, before I had heard there was going to be a film, I had talked about on the podcast, these songs sound so good, I know he can't tour with, an orchestra, but gosh, that would be so cool to see, and then when they filmed it, and, that beautiful barn, and, one thing, I've told this story multiple times, but, my wife leans over to me during the film and she's like, "You're really jealous of those people in the barn, aren't you?" And I go, "Damn straight, I'm really jealous of them." And then when I saw that they got a credit, at the end, he thanked them. I'm like, damn it. I loved it. And then,
one of my favorite songs on Western Star is Somewhere North of Nashville.
Yeah.
I think the reason why is because it's such a classically Bruce song that tells this great story, you know? And the other thing that I like about Letter to You is I feel like there are elements of that album that you could plug into just about any album in Bruce's catalog and it would fit perfectly. JD Needs a Shooter could fit perfectly on Darkness. It could fit, perfectly on just about any other thing. And there's a bunch of songs on there that feel that same way. And, this one could go on The Rising. This one could go on, Living on a Dream, and or Working on a Dream. So, there's just a lot of different things that I think are great about that album.
No one has brought that up before, but I'm thinking like I'll See You in My Dreams would have been perfect to end The Rising. It's really, really well done, and I've been very vocal before we knew there was going to be an album. 2020 had been such a horrible year. Not that 2021 has been a banner year altogether for us, but, I had said that if we got a new president in November and a Springsteen album before the end of the year, maybe 2020 would not be the worst year ever. And so then when we got that, I was just so happy. And I do think that when they hit the road next year, knock on wood, I believe that they will. I'm hoping he does a lot of the same thing like he did during the Wrecking Ball tour, the Rising tour, where he has 6 or 8 of these songs from either Letter to You or Western Stars mixed in with all the other stuff that everyone wants to hear.
Yeah, I agree. I would be, when you get to be an artist of his acclaim and his catalog volume, it's just hard to make everybody happy, right?
Yes.
Like I've never heard Jungle Land live. Of 14 shows I've gone to, never heard it live.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't realize that till I sat down and started looking at the set list.
Right.
And, it wouldn't be the same, I think, without Clarence. Man, right. Jake's so good.
He is.
But at the same time, like that's a song that I want to hear,
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to see the Seeger sessions live. I would love to hear some of those songs played and some of those things too. But what do you take out to get those in? You're already playing 3-4 hours to begin with.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah.
it's hard to kind of base it after a certain time.
Yeah, and I had the experience where the first 7 times I saw him, I had not heard Thunder Road. It worked out. My first show was in 2002. Now I've heard The Rising every time I've seen him live. That's the one song that I have seen every show. And then the next 8 shows I saw Thunder Road every time, right? So it works out. Well, let's go back to, you mentioned Darkness being your favorite. Are there, why does it speak to you so much? Why is that an album you go back to over and over again, Mike?
Well, and here's my mania for this album. So a couple years ago, a buddy of mine is at a yard sale here in town, and he sees a copy. It's an album. It could be a repress or anything. It's the Darkness on the Edge of Town album, and he sends me a picture of it. And I was like, "Hey, that's a pretty good find. How much for it?" He said the guy only wants $5 for it. So I just told him to buy it. I don't even own a record player.
Right.
Okay. But I had to have it. Right. So, I think pound for pound, top to bottom, for me, every song just hits on that album for whatever reason. You know, I remember hearing the first drum beat of Badland and thinking that it was unlike anything that I had ever heard. And this was after I had listened to Born in the USA. I'd listened to I'd probably even listened to The River before I'd listened to Darkness. Um, you know, the cover art on the album is iconic. Bruce in front of a closet door or shades, a shaded window. I mean, and then by the time you get to the hi-hat start of Candy's Room, I'm all in. I'm feeling. I'm going to listen to. I could probably listen to 2 or 3 songs and then maybe move on to something else. But then I get to Candy's Room, and now I'm listening to the whole album. And it happens to me almost every time. The title track is the last song on the album, which that usually does not happen. But by the time you get there, you're almost like, oh, yeah, this is the name of the album. But I've heard so many other songs in that, in the 9 others that preceded it that I really, really enjoyed. Streets of Fire is probably my favorite song on the album. That's another song he doesn't play a whole lot. But and it runs the whole gamut. For me, it's a little more stark. It's definitely not as produced as the albums that will come after it.
Right.
But it's a one that I can put on and listen to every day and probably never get tired of it.
Are there other albums that, while not up to Darkness, that hold a special place for you in your heart?
Nebraska a lot. I think again that stark, just acoustic format for me is a really enjoyable thing. So Tunnel of Love is always going to kind of be an interesting album that I've kind of vacillated on it every once in a while. It might be because that was the first show that I took a girlfriend to, and my romance with her probably ended the same way that Bruce's with Julianne Phillips did.
Yes.
So maybe I got some bittersweet moments in there that I'm going to have to work through on my own. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think it's an enjoyable album. I know a lot of real dedicated Bruce fans would rather forget the Human Touch and Lucky Town years, but there's some real gems in there that I really enjoy. I love the fact that Sam Moore is on it. It's really the first time we kind of hear Sam playing with him regularly.
Yeah.
And so I think that's always going to have a special place in my heart.
Yeah. Better Days is one of my favorite songs. It's in my top 5. It means a lot to me. Okay, so we know you're chasing Jungle Land. What are a few other songs that's on your bingo card of things you want to see?
So it's not exactly it's definitely not one you're probably going to hear a whole lot, but I would actually love to hear the wrestler live. Love to see how he pulls that song off. To me, it's not exactly the most upbeat and uplifting song in the whole world. Um, so I think that's one that I would say is definitely on my rare song list that I've not heard, but I would really like to hear. Um, I've not heard. It's a B side, but "Stand on It" is a song that I really really like. I remember playing that on the 45 over and over and over again when it came out. Um, uh, those are a couple of the ones. Secret Garden's another one that I really enjoy. I think is really good. He's played that one a few more times. I've kind of always missed out on that one. So those kind of come to mind as ones that I've missed out on that maybe again, as the catalog gets bigger, it's probably unlikely unless you hold that sign up, that magic sign at a show, and you
Yes,
decide
yeah,
to play the song.
right.
So
I know that the album shows he did, checked off a lot of things. Like when he did the River in full in
yeah,
2016, a lot of people like yes, and then other songs. Yeah, I those are good choices. Those are very good choices.
yeah.
Um, so what haven't I asked you that I should have asked you, Mike?
Um, for a little while there, I tried to become a Bruce memorabilia person. I actually have a very large. It's in the closet over there. I'm getting ready to move, and
Yeah,
I have this large. It was obviously a promotional item when Born to Run came out. It is essentially a recreation of the massive record.
yeah,
Doesn't play, of course. Um, and so I have that. I have a few other little pieces here and there that I've kind of saved over time. I kind of gave it up mainly because it was difficult. It probably is a lot easier to find it now, but you know how
yeah,
it is. If the market for something is really, really good and the cost is really high, and so you
yeah.
have to balance those things out a little bit. But um, you know, there's a part of me that says maybe I should have stuck with that and not pursued other hobbies. But
Well,
those times are past.
yeah.
I think sometimes.
Well, and I always have to counter with if it's in a closet somewhere or if it's in a drawer, I'm not enjoying it. So, like you can see behind me, I've got 3 posters from the River Tour. I've got some acrylic art, I have it. And so luckily my lovely bride lets me, here's my Bruce Springsteen sneakers, but she lets me because I podcast here in the front room. She lets it be a little Brucey. But if you aren't going to enjoy it, and like after a while, though I have seen people that like a lot of people, when you're climbing the steps to go upstairs, there'll be a wall of family photos. I have seen people that is all Springsteen, just it's there. So that's good. Um,
Yeah.
when you worked in the paper, did you ever get to sneak in Springsteen quotes or Springsteen references in the articles?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was like prolific at it or anything, but if the moment fit, I was actually an editorial writer for quite a while, and there would be times that I would, sneak in a little reference here and there. I don't. One that comes to mind is I think I covered a football game one time, and I kind of dropped a Born to Run reference in there, but and somebody called me out on it that worked in the newsroom after the fact, but it was one of those deals where I felt like it was appropriate, and yeah, I probably skewed it a little bit because of my fandom, but at the same time, it was part of the story, so I didn't tend to worry about it too much.
That's not too bad. Did you were you able to do concert reviews when you're
You know, I
a
did a
paper?
few. I
Yeah,
did a few. I never did anything real big, and I never tried to test my luck, in Columbus or Cleveland or anything like that.
yeah,
I also, I go to concerts, I go to live music. Of course, before the pandemic, I went to a
sure.
lot of shows. In fact, I just went to my first show a couple weeks ago. Since I went to one in October of 2019, And then my most recent show was in September of 2021, so almost
What
2 years.
what'd you go see?
Just went and saw Need to Breathe a couple of weeks ago, which
Okay.
was tremendous. They were
Nice.
amazing. My last one before that was the Black Keys.
Okay.
And you know, I kind of do that for enjoyment and for relax,
So
to
yeah.
relax. And so combining the two just felt like I wasn't a music critic, so to me it was
No, that
like
makes sense. Yeah, I
let's just go and
appreciate
have
that.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is great. This is great. I appreciate it. Um, let's let's if you're listening to this and you're a fan of Mike's, um, maybe you're like, hey, I've heard him talk, civic pride on, Feels Pod. So maybe let me hear him talk about a little music. So if you are listening to this podcast because you're a fan of Mike's, thank you for listening. I end every podcast with the Mary question. And so what this is Jay Armstrong, who is an honors English teacher from the Philadelphia area. He just recently retired. Would spend 2 days of his school curriculum, his honors English class, the senior class, would break apart Thunder Road as a poem. They would go through the lyrics. They would talk about the imagery. They would talk about, compare it to Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. And at the end of the 2 days, he asks this class, does Mary get in the car? So Mike, that is your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
All right, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I mean, he makes a really great case for her to do it, right?
Yes, he
I
does.
mean, you get to the porch, they're gone. It's a town full of losers, and the only way out is to leave and to leave with him, right? She sent other boys away, in theory, because he's coming back to get her.
Right.
So she almost has to get in, right? So I think she gets in. She has to get in
Okay.
because she's waited for all of this to happen. So
Yeah.
Mary gets in. There's no question in my mind.
Very nice. I don't know if you've, I ask that question every episode, and because you love Western Stars so much, I had someone say that absolutely she gets in the car, they drive to the west, and Moonlight Motel is him mourning Mary's death.
Yeah, I did
So
hear that one, and that's a compelling argument,
it is.
and almost a fitting closure.
It is. Yes, it does kind of bookend that really well done. Very nice, sir. Any final thoughts you want to share with me or my audience?
Well, I mean, number one, I just kind of stumbled upon your podcast and what I'm doing. I'm a, as a trained journalist, I love stories. I love storytelling. And so I love what you're doing with this and letting people tell their stories. And of course, we're all just part of this big fan culture here around Bruce. And so I keep doing what you're doing because it's working. I feel like you have captured something with this podcast that, when I go to shows, I see people that are in their 60s and their 70s sitting in the shows next to the people that are in their teens and 20s. And to me, there's just the field is green for this podcast. So
Yeah, thank you.
I'm enjoying it. I have the luxury of being able to go back and listen to a bunch of them now, and so that's been kind of fun. In fact, I'm taking a trip tomorrow. I plan on listening. So I'm really appreciative of the work that you're doing. I'm really appreciative of the fact that at 70 plus, Bruce is still out there making great music and
Yeah.
promising to get back out there and be with fans again. I'm hopeful that 2022 will bring some of that for all of us.
Knocking on wood, I'm right there with you. Thank you. I love doing the podcast, and people will ask me what is the podcast, and I'll say, it really is about the power and the magic of rock and roll. I said, but on a practical, I want you to feel like you're in the queue waiting to get in the pit and you're overhearing a couple people talk about Bruce. That's what I'm hoping to capture. And, so people to share their stories. And so I appreciate the kind words. It is truly something I love doing. So, and thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it. If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
So I'm on Twitter. I'm at Miggy T, Miggyyt. I also have my podcast on Twitter, which is at FeelsPod. It's the Feels Like Home podcast. We're on Buzzsprout if you want to look us up there. And then I'm on Facebook. If you go to facebook.com/Chilli, Chilli Chamber Prez with a Z,
Okay.
you'll find me there as well. So
Very nice. Well, Mike, this was joy. I appreciate it. Hopefully we can meet at a show sometime and we can share a hug and talk some more in person. And I just appreciate all the support. Listeners, you go get vaccinated. Go, let's be good to each other. Let's wear our mask. Let's wash our hands. Let's remember to be diligent, and let's be good to each other, because really that's the only way we're going to get through this. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, listeners, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts, as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.